Welcome to the talk show Promise Bangladesh, sponsored by Crown Cement. Viewers, today we'll discuss many issues, especially we'll rotate around geopolitics, recent visits to American delegation to Bangladesh, and political economy. And to suit the very purposes, we have invited two very important guests. One is Barrister Asaduzzaman Fuaad, Joint Member Secretary in charge of International Department of AB Party. Thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. Brilliant. Thank you.
Other being Dr. Saim, Amir Faisal. Basically, he is an economist. And he is the vice chairman of Zaker party, one of the leading party in the Islamic bloc. How are you, Mr.?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Barrister Fuaad. You know very well the recent visit of American delegation to Bangladesh. It is talk of the town now. And there are so many talks, so many issues are there, especially the post-election scenario cropped up there, and they discussed at length. And the fundamental question is, Bangladesh, America agreed in principle to have an understanding, two military, army, defense and pact. One is Zesumia, other is AXA. What is your understanding?
Thank you very much. First of all, we need to break down the delegation members. Who are they? The delegation was led by a senior official at the National Security Council, and the lady is also an admiral of the American Navy. She's also senior advisor to the White House, President Biden as well. The second member of the delegation was a U.S. aid official. He's in charge of the Asia region. And the youngest and quite well-known in Bangladesh, Afrin Akhtar, she's a Deputy Assistant Secretary of the State Department, looking after particularly climate, Rohingya issues in Bangladesh and the region. And second, also need to understand who they met during their 3 days visit. On a political landscape, the only meeting took place with the BNP, and sadly nobody briefed. We haven't heard anything from the BNP leadership, nor from the American administration, the delegation, what was discussed. They also met a diverse group of people, members of the civil society. They met our foreign minister, our environment minister, and also some NGOs who work with the youths, and as well as some labor leaders who work for the garments workers and the betterment, the better wage and pays and kind of things. And the important was how the Indo-Pacific engagement policy can be seen here through. On my last show, if you could remember that the American ambassador had talked about how the 5 points engagement with Americans with Bangladesh at our National Defense College in August last year. And he outlined quite candidly what should be the engagement point with Bangladesh. The first, the Americans would like to see Bangladesh as a free and open, stable country. Second, they would like to see Bangladesh holds liberal democratic values, human rights, accountability, good governance, and so forth. Third is economic progress, where the labor markets would work properly, corporations would not have that much red tapes, garment workers and other workers would be paid living wage and so forth. Fourth is the climate resilience issue, and fifth is the Rohingya repatriation. Now, on those 5 engagement points, if you apply the delegation, it only covered the bottom 3. There is nothing important about the democratic values and the liberal values you'd like to see. There is nothing about the stability and the political engagement and so forth, except a small meeting with the BNP leadership. Even they haven't met any other political party, including the ruling party. So it gives a message that on a future trajectory, America would be more interested to work with our climate issues, our Rohingya repatriation issues, and on the labor front, looking after the interest and the better wage and living conditions and so forth. It could be translated into a depressing scenario for those who are struggling for a democratic transitions into vote and accountability and a government in place who's going to be elected by the people. That quarter is quite frustrated to see that engagement happen. It also translates the letter of the president given to the regime's prime minister, and even the post-election visits to the different ministry, the ambassador has precisely saying, yes, we do not see the election as free and fair, but we see there are other areas of work that the American administration would like to engage and carry on their patronization as they did in the past, like Rohingya repatriation, climate, and labor front. So it is a clear indication that for this regime, what should be the American engagement? Apart from that, there's two other important issues have been discussed with the administration and our regime. One is about signing up. There's a long outstanding military pact, Aqsa and Jusumia, as you referred to. And of course, there's a serious reservation from other regional partners and the friends of the regime, i.e. China, Russia, and India even. They seriously opposed to this engagement. And the serious discussion took place between the two delegations about the withdrawal of the sanction on RAB. And there is a 5 proposition given by the administration, and there's going to be like a given in detail in writing in a couple of weeks' time. And if that is met, only then the administration would consider withdrawing the sanction from RAB and the other law enforcement agencies and staffs. Now, it is also interesting why, without talking about democracy and human rights this time around, which they have been doing it for the last 2 years, why they are suddenly shifting to military discussion and giving more of a bargain chips with the administration. So we can talk about how the military might get developed. Even there is a joint exercise. The Air Force of Bangladesh Air Force and the American Air Force had a brief, short exercise on a different airlifting position. And of course, that is also interesting. Why Air Force? Why airlifting? Given the tension going on across the border with Burma. So it's quite interesting that how we should envisage our relationship with America. Now, does it mean that we would not expect America to be vocal and loud and clear about democracy and human rights? Yes, they will perhaps keep on.
I will come to you here. Well, Dr. Saim, you are an economist. And you know very well that Prime Minister herself beating the drum, the Bangladesh economy is very strong. Do you think so?
Thank you, Dr.Sinha, for having me. My greetings and felicitations and salutations to viewers both home and abroad, and my salutations to Barrister Fuaad here. So first and foremost, what Bangladesh today is faced with is the impossible trinity. In economics, we say with high interest rates, with high inflation, and you compound together exchange rate volatility, and compounded with depleting reserves and high unemployment, what you have is the perfect economic storm. Currently, as you know, the Bangladesh's reserves has plummeted from $48 billion down to $20.5 billion right now. What we saw was a tremendous current account deficit, close to $30 billion. And compounded on top of that, we had a budget deficit of $35 billion. So fundamentally, with the trade deficit, with the budget deficit, Bangladesh, for the past 4 fiscal years, so 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, have gone through an absolutely appalling economic trajectory right now. And of course, we understand that in the fiscal year of 2018 to 2019, as well as the 2019 to 2020 fiscal year, both those fiscal years, Bangladesh was a booming economy. We cannot deny, regardless of my political take or Barrister Fuad's political take, Bangladesh was in a respectable position, economic position globally. And Bangladesh today, while being the 35th richest economy in the world and the 27th richest economy in the world in terms of PPP numbers, there is tremendous inequality of wealth. So what I personally fear that Bangladesh is headed towards is a tremendous malfunctioning disbursement, distribution of wealth, and there is tremendous inequity in financial resources. If you think about the Bangladeshi economy right now, there are 14 crore 60 lakh bank accounts all over Bangladesh across the 55 Bangladeshi commercial and state-owned banks. 9 crore bank accounts have deposits less than 5,000 taka. So as you understand, we have built our economy on a pyramid scheme where the people at the top are controlling maybe 60 to 70 to even, I would dare say, 80% of the country's wealth. And if we want to heal the country, to disburse the wealth, Bangladesh has a budget or a war chest of 70 billion US dollars. This is the present budget of the present fiscal year. Our healthcare sector gets an allocation of $3.5 billion US dollars. Over the past 15 years, if there was equitable distribution of state resources, efficient distribution of our budget, I really believe we should not have poverty right now. Right before the onset of the COVID crisis, our poverty numbers were close to 22 to 24%. As soon as COVID hit, our poverty ratio went to approximately 45 to 47%. It showed that almost 9 crore people went below the poverty line. And it goes to show the fragility of the present economic system and why it needs an overhaul, a revitalizing attempt in order to stabilize people's wealth. And at the same time, when you have hyperinflation in the cases that you see, especially on the most essential commodities, in a situation like this, what can Bangladesh do right now? And one of the most important measures that the Bangladeshi Central Bank has to make right now, is an aggressive contractionary monetary policy. Most of the banks that we've seen across the board, not only the Islamic banks, as well as the commercial banks, they have disbursed debt without fair collateralized value of assets. So as soon as these businesses are going belly up or they're close to defaulting, these debt-based loan disbursements were based on depositors' assets. So you've compromised depositors' assets by giving it to fraudulent businesses. And across the board, we have presently 21% of non-performing loans right now. In any economy in the world, this is unacceptable. And we have to put our credits where I felt like it was due. Especially in the past fiscal year, we saw that for the past 15 months, as inflation was roaring rampantly high over, I would personally say, across unofficial and official statistics, at least at 12%. I do think the monetary response, while it is still in effect from December 2023, it came too late. In America, in order to control inflation, the American Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States of America, hiked interest rates by 500 basis points, almost 5 percentage points. So naturally, the value of the US dollar went up. The Bangladeshi taka lost 40% of its value in the curb market. Naturally, now most of our businessmen cannot import at higher import bill. They cannot service their debt right now. I know a business, for example, that had taken a debt of 100 million US dollars. It was a US denominated debt. As soon as they converted to the Bangladeshi taka, the value of the taka went down by 40%. So in the space of 7 to 8 months, the businessman in question right now has lost 40% of the capital value. From the Dhaka Stock Exchange, we saw a direct exodus of $600 million.
I will come to this point.
Of course.
Dhaka Stock Exchange.
Please.
Well, Barrister Fuaad, do you believe the Awami League for this time, Hasina administration is in a position to cope up with all the challenges they have, or they are very much confined within the range of talks?
Well, I think it's not about this tenure. They have failed all along in the last 15 years. They couldn't make the national interest as the priority principle to deal with the neighbors and the regional powers and the others. Now, how, with regard to the geopolitics, how do we look at the interest positions of ours? We have three kind of interest-based countries. One is our neighbors, who are basically an inevitable reality. We like it or not, these are our Mexican walls. So Burma and India. On a second phase, we have the nearest regional neighbors, or the people who are so much have interest, bilateral interest with us, China, Russia, and South Asian countries. And the third, we have the Western neighbors, if I may say, that the development partners, our export markets, and so forth. Now, what are the bargains that we have mutually with each of those segments? Now, if you listen to the ruling party leadership, the only thing you would hear, they are unhappy about America, and they are so much happy about India. And the term they use, that our friendly neighbor. In political science, there is no principle called friendly state, but there are principle of enemy state. And by default, due to the political science, the historical experiences, every neighbor by default is an enemy state, because this is the first frontier where your sovereignty would be compromised. And we've seen it many times over. Sadly, when the ruling party members and the oligarchs talk about as if India is a country of us, as if we are India, as if their interest is our interest, as if our banks are their resources, as if our market is their dollar earning remittance sources. That's how the ruling party talks about. Yet our interest in last 15 years or so much heavily interfered into and damaged by this relationship. And it is not a sustainable relationship. We have no grudge with regard to the Indian people, because they are as deprived in their own countries, so are our people in our country. So our concern is whether New Delhi's administration's interference into Dhaka's politics can be a feasible future for both of the nations. And we believe no. It has to be on a mutual interest base. It has to be on a win-win policy base. It has to be between the people where both respects each other's expectations and aspirations. With regard to Burma, what happened in last few weeks, we have seen how the regime has been taken by surprise. Absolutely no preparation. Absolutely our intelligence and law enforcement agencies had failed to deal with it, because our law enforcement agencies are busy crushing oppositions in the country.
Well, thank you. We will go for a short break. Viewers, we are going for a short break. Please keep watching. We are back to the talk show Promise Bangladesh, sponsored by Crown Cement. And this is Sinha M. Sayeed anchoring this very talk show. We were having talks with two giant personalities in Bangladesh. One is Barrister Fuaad, and other being Dr. Saim. Both of them belong to a political party. Fuaad belongs to AB party, and Saim is the Zaker party. Well, Mr. Saim, you are talking about the economic health of Bangladesh. You know very well that banking system in Bangladesh is almost in a serious catastrophic state of standing, and government is thinking about the merger. And you are
Correct.
talking
Absolutely.
about the contractionist policy, monetary policy.
Correct.
But government is having the concept of expansionist policy. So having all these things in mind, what is your focus?
Presently, as you know, the monetary policy statement inaugurated by our governor of Bangladeshi Bank, I congratulate the measure. However, we wish that it happened from March 2022, because we would have protected the value of the Bangladeshi taka against the US dollar instead of a 40% slide. Now the question is, how can we preserve exchange rate stability? And one of the predominant takes that the Bangladeshi government has taken, because we have $164 billion worth of Bangladeshi taka across all banks in Bangladesh, in order to preserve liquidity, in order to control what in Bangla we say is tarolle shankor, or a liquidity crisis. What the Bangladeshi government has now taken the initiative of is doing BDT to USD swaps. So commercial banks that had foreign exchange reserves would swap their foreign earnings with the Bangladeshi taka at a 2.5% interest rates, significantly lower than the repo rate that is offered, or the overnight SOFR rate. So presently what we have noticed is that deposit rate has increased by 300 basis points. As a result of that, savers are now incentivized to actually save more. And what was predominantly criticized over the past 3 or 2.5 years, I should say, is actually coming into effect right now. So from the policy viewpoint, we have to trust the tried and tested policies that have been enacted by the US or the OECD countries. Simply saying that this does not work for Bangladesh is not a policy response. And what I really believe right now that Bangladesh government should avoid is the bailout of commercial banks. As you've noticed, the 7 Islamic banks, or quote-unquote Islamic banks, that have been bailed out, it's contradictory to the contractionary monetary policy that the Bangladeshi government is advocating right now. If you're bailing out your friends and their well-wishers, you're effectively harming the stability of the Bangladeshi taka. At the same time, the printing of the Bangladeshi BDT notes, if we could service our debt repayments, if we could construct mega projects in the next 5 fiscal years by simply printing money, no country in the world would be impoverished. There would be no development project that we could not undertake. However, there is a reality of and a consequential effect of printing Bangladeshi taka. What happened was, in the past fiscal year, we printed 143,000 crore worth of Bangladeshi taka. As a result, we saw inflation reach the 9%, 10%, 11%, 12% threshold. In order to preserve this, my first policy prescription is to prevent the printing of the Bangladeshi taka, focus more on the treasury bills as well as the government bonds. In the past month, we have raised close to 6,000 crore of depositors' wealth through our treasury bills as well as our government bonds. Imagine what we could have done over the past 10, 15, 20 years. Imagine the infrastructure projects. If it could have been financed by the Bangladeshi taka through depositors' investment schemes, through sukuk bonds, which in this case in Bangladesh has failed, but we could in the future potentially finance the mega economic projects with our own money. And one important point that is in conjunction with the discussion that we're having today with the banking sector is the concept of debt repayments. I've met many economists as well as policymakers from the ruling party, and I hold no grievances. We're not in the 14-party alliance, neither are we in the 20-party or the 36-party anti-government alliance. My proposition is very simple. Our interest is with the people of Bangladesh. In terms of debt repayments, today Bangladesh's gross external as well as domestic debt has reached close to $95 billion US. Our reserves are at $20 billion, and bear in mind that $4.7 billion was exercised by the tokenary measure given by the IMF, which is backed by the US Federal Reserve as well. In a situation like this, in order to protect depositors' wealth, in order to protect our capacity for debt repayments, I have a question. The Rupur power plant, it's phenomenal, okay? It's phenomenal that we're part of the Atomic Energy Commission. But can we afford to take on a $13 billion bill at 4% or 5% interest rates? Do we have the capacity to repay our debt by 2035, 2036? Padma Bridge is a landmark project, and I'm a direct beneficiary. Before, it used to take me from Dhaka to Faridpur approximately 4.5 hours. I can reach my home in less than 2 hours right now. This is amazing, but we have to understand what capacity do the Bangladeshi taxpayers have in order to repay its debt. I have phenomenal capacity to raise for a construction project, for example. If I bite off more than I can chew, then in the next 10 to 15 fiscal years, Bangladesh comes at the point of a sovereign debt default. And this is exactly what I fear going into the next
sovereign debt
cycle.
default. Barrister Fuaad, you are a political leader, and think of the state and people very seriously. And what Dr. Saim says, what is your contention?
Well, I think that's quite reasonable assessment of the economy, and I'm sure Dr. Saim would be saying more about how the reserve, the progressively declining reserve, would affect our imports, culminating into exports, and then recycling into our remittance flow inwards, and how that can be translated into the local development and kind of thing. This is a huge cycle, and once a cycle is broken, in some point, it's going to affect the other. That's the whole economic breakdown that we can see through, basically. And this is the first time it happened in the world, that we've seen in Zimbabwe. back in 80s and 90s. We have seen in Venezuela's in last decade or so. We have seen in many other South American countries. We have seen the 90s economic crash in Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Cambodia, and so forth. So it's a total chaos. And you can imagine the second most important post in a government is the finance ministry. And in the last tenure, we have seen a de facto debt finance minister who could not even read out a bill to the parliament, that how a bill to be presented. Now, of course, an individual could be ill. We have absolute sympathy as an individual, but why he has to be in that chair? A finance minister doesn't exist in a country where our economy is in chaos. Now, surely my colleague would be saying more about the corruptions, how the loot and plunders. We have seen reports from Bangladesh Bank and the revenues that between 2010-11 financial year to 21 and 22 financial years, $45 billion against the exports didn't come back to Bangladesh. This is how the money has been laundered. And how do we see it? When we see one of our oligarchs become the top 10 billionaires in Singapore, when we see one of our quick rental oligarchs become one of the largest investors in Singapore, when we see one of our ministers own few hundred flats in London and Manhattan and in other places. All of us lived in London. We know how expensive they are. And the areas where those flats are the Gulshan and Dhanmundi type areas of those posh areas of London. So how that money went out? There is no registration from Bangladesh Bank record that any permission has been granted to any company to invest overseas, dollar to be remitted to London or any other countries, or to Singapore per se. So how our oligarchs are becoming the top buyer of plots and flats in London, or becoming top investors in Singapore and Hong Kong and Dubai and other places. This is people's money. Global Financial Integrity Report between 2009 and 15 said, on a roughly basis of $7.6 billion laundered from this country. And once the report came out, the regime deliberately stopped sharing any information with the WTO and other international bodies. So nobody knows how much money they are looting out to the country and depositing in switch banks. So this is how not only our lifetime things, it is our future. Generations have to pay off these debts, my colleague was rightfully saying. Altogether, he was only saying the external debts. If you add up to the internal debts, it is more than $260 billion debts. And there is a lot of data manipulation. Nothing of the state institution comes out, you can consider them as credible. Nothing. They're all lying about the data and the statistics. I can give you thousands of examples that doesn't match with one another.
Thank you very much, Barrister Fuaad. We'll go for a short break. Viewers, we're going for a short break. Please keep watching. We are back to the talk show Promise Bangladesh, sponsored by Crown Cement. And this is Sinha Sayeed, anchored in the talk show. We are having talks with two very brilliant boys of Bangladesh. And they are what they are. And from this standpoint, I would like to raise a question to you, Dr. Saim. Corruption and good governance. How do you relate this?
Without good governance, you're not ever going to have equitable resource allocation. And as I was mentioning in the beginning of our discussion today, $70 billion, that's the budget of the Bangladesh economy this fiscal year. Across 64 districts, 493 sub-districts, 4,554 unions, 330 municipalities, 12 city corporations, 465 city corporation wards. Every district with an equitable resource allocation gets $1 billion, every single district. Imagine what we could do if there was provincial systems of governance, if our national budget was based on a district level budget resource allocation and a city corporation level budget allocation. poverty should have been a distant catastrophe. That's what I really believe. We have the money. It's not like Bangladesh doesn't have the money. We have one of the biggest war chests in the world. What we do lack is efficiency in resource allocation. And one of the main ways to do that is through funding at the very sub-district and at the union levels. No matter how much you develop Dhaka, but if you go to North Bengal, I visited just recently Kurigram. The disparity in wealth between the tri-state area of Banani, Gulshan and Baridhara versus Kurigram, Shodor Upojela, Burungamari, Nageshwari Upojela, it is a catastrophe. And in order to change this, our bureaucrats need to decentralize this and not centralize the autonomous bodies, such as the Bangladeshi Bank, as well as the LGRD ministry, the power ministry, as well as the finance ministry. We should have subsidiary bodies in every single district if we want equitable resource allocation. It takes 5 good years for Bangladesh to reach $1 trillion worth of our GDP economy. And this is very much achievable. But the fundamentals, as well as the institutional framework, needs to be reassessed. It needs to be revitalized. And I must say this, that I'm not an anti-capitalist economist. I believe in capitalist principles. I also believe in some socialist principles as well. But we must have collective shared prosperity, not individual prosperity for some people. And I beg to God that Bangladesh does not become a Soviet-styled oligarchy that we saw in the post-90s. Because the ripple effect onto the political arena is extremely dangerous.
Thank you very much. Well, Barrister Fuaad, you listen to what Dr. Saim expressed from the very bosom of his mind. And basically, he believes in capitalism in positive sense. And he believes in Bangladesh perspective. Socialism is not possible at all. At the same time, he slightly talked about the provincial system of government. And for the sake of decentralization, there are two concepts in public administration: deconcentration and decentralization. But Saim is talking about the provincial government. I mean decentralization of the state machinery. And do you think unity form of government is not enough for Bangladesh?
I think with regard to capitalism and socialism, I would rather argue that there are value propositions from both sides. All of us had lived in England and traveled extensively in European countries. So we have seen how the welfare model of economy within the capitalist bracket can perfectly work well and deliver to the less well-off. That's the whole basis of the post-Second World transformation, the wealth to be shared by not only by the rich and the toppers, rather everyone on the bottom. That's how wealth is enjoyed. If the wealth is accumulated only by 1%, that 1% cannot enjoy the wealth. Just think of if the 90% people are poor, your very expensive car can be vandalized. Your very expensive suit can be robbed at the broad daylight. So if the rest of the people are less well off, your wealth is not secure. So even for the safety of those 1%, that wealth needs to be shared. So I think what we need for a developing nation like us, we need a balance between the free market, entrepreneurship, at the same time, welfare principles, looking after the poor, providing shelters to the less well-off, providing benefits to the poor and the unemployed and who cannot afford their basic living commodities. Also providing the basic service, like we have seen the NHS. There is no private medical college or private hospitals in England, but there is a private service within the same hospital, provided by the same doctor, same nurses, same technicians, same machineries, same administration, same management, same funding, yet a different service. So that can easily be provided within our system. And given that we inherited most of our institutions from the British colonial time, it matches a lot of things. I was surprised to see not a single institution that you can find in England doesn't exist in Bangladesh. Everything exists here. You just think of the local Upojela health complex model. It's like a GP surgery. It just needs to be accessible. It just needs to be developed. It just needs to be made more affordable so the people can get the better service, the consultant level service, the diagnosis level service there. So what we feel, we need a balance between the free market, entrepreneurship basis economy versus wealth should be shared between our citizens who are less well off. Second point about the decentralization thing, I think we already have that administration in place. Personally, I am not in favor of the provincial government. It is because of the geopolitics and security issue. Because we are living in such a place, we simply cannot afford to have a local administration so independent. We simply cannot afford it. We have to have a unitary model of government, very strong at the center, very powerful at the center, very manageable at the center, yet deliverable at the grassroots. What was essential, what Sheikh Mujib government had done, I don't support the Bakshal model of the governance, but I support the Jila Parishad, the district council model, because that gives a representation above the DC and SP. In England and Americas and other places we have seen, every bureaucracy has an elected body above them. What we have in the city corporation, the mayor, the councillors are elected, but there is an executive supported by them. In the Upajila Parishad, sub-district councils, we have seen the chairman, vice chairmen elected, but they have an administration supported by the TNO, education officer, health officer, family planning officer, XYZ. So I think we already have that management at the place. What we need to strengthen them. Firm leadership is essential to take the MPs back to parliament. No business whatsoever for MPs. And that's why we have seen so third-class, incompetent, arrogant, ignorant and illiterate members of parliament shamed for the nation. You hardly can find 10 parliamentarians that you can be proud of. Even when we were growing up, we would watch BTV Parliament that time. You can still name from both of the aisles the brilliant parliamentarians, starting from Tofail Ahmed, Shurunjit Gupta, Barrister Maudud, Barrister Zamiruddin Sarkar, Salahuddin Qadir Chaudhuri. You can name brilliant parliamentarians from both of the aisles. Yet now, not a single competent parliamentarian you can name for last 3 or 4 parliaments. It's a shame for the nation. After 53 years, the top parties, BRAS, couldn't produce parliamentarians that can debate laws. Most of the so-called MPs, these are illegal selected MPs in those parliaments, are one on development projects, development programs. They go to the people seeking votes like the Union Council members. Absolutely, there is no difference between the campaign promises and the pledges made by the MP candidate and the Union Council member candidate. So there is absolutely no sense of decentralization, what their jobs are. Yet our constitution has been very blunt what their job is, but they are not doing it. That needs to be changed. MPs only for legislation. That's how we strengthen local administration.
Thank you very much. Dr. Saim?
No, I support the statements made by Barrister Fuaad. Of course, I totally agree. There is a geopolitical risk of decentralization, especially of local governance as well. So there's absolutely no doubt about that. And on the record, I would also like to say that Bangladesh presently, with the remittance numbers, have shown a positive return, especially for January 2024. We have clocked $2.1 billion of influx. However, we need to remember that while we have a present target by the Bangladeshi Bank of $24 billion of influx through our remittance formal channels, through the informal channels, we have another additional $27 billion that come in but don't get added to our central bank reserves. And in order to curb the difference, we have to adjust our formal exchange rate with the informal exchange rate as well. So this is one of the present crises that I believe would mitigate the depleting foreign exchange reserves as well as keep our exchange rate stability. The second point that I would like to make, which I think is pertinent to our discussion today, Bangladesh needs to invest in the future. If you look at the Norwegian pension fund, which is known as the oil fund, they have $1.2 trillion of investments globally across Apple, Microsoft, Tesla, you name the S&P 500 companies or the NASDAQ 100 companies. Bangladesh's reserves, had we invested even $1 billion into the NASDAQ 100 or to the S&P 500 or into artificial intelligence, like a company like NVIDIA has returned almost 2,000% returns over the past 5 fiscal years. Imagine what we can do if we made strategic investments, similar to what sovereign wealth funds make, regardless of the tenure or the amount of investment scale. Our promise is to make the investment on behalf of taxpayers.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Saim and Barrister Fuaad. This is a time to leave the station. Viewers, we are about to end this talk show, and before ending the talk show, I have to summarize what the two speakers eloquently and vocally expressed, and both of them are very high of the future of Bangladesh. At the same time, they very much or it, and they cannot even to satisfy themselves about the ongoing scenario in Bangladesh. What is happening in the field of economics, in the field of banking sector, in the field of politics, and in the field of geopolitics, everything is in a mess. So how to get rid of all these things? That is the main concern of the two speakers. And both of them also believe these are not the last days. Days ahead of must be imbued with the sense of true patriotism, good governance, and a flourishing economy. And thank you very much. We'll meet you again in the next talk show. Yeah.